If you've ever visited the Clifton Hill area in Niagara Falls, Ontario, or even seen a photo of it for that matter, chances are you're familiar with this sign. Many of you watching this may even have fond childhood memories here. It has perhaps become the most distinct icon of Clifton Hill, which is saying something for a street also home to a 175-foot tall Ferris wheel. This is the Great Canadian Midway, the largest arcade in Canada. A family entertainment center home to rides, dining options, and over 300 games. But how long has this stood here, and what was located there before? This is the story of Dazzleland and the Great Canadian Midway, two attractions closely ingrained with each other, Clifton Hill, and larger plans that never saw the light of day. I'm Alex Crew, and welcome to the first episode of Canadian Amusement History. The modern history of the land Clifton Hill sits on can be traced all the way back to the mid-1800s, when it was called Ferry Hill in the small village of Clifton, overlooking the majestic Niagara Falls. In 1837, local businessman and landowner Samuel Zimmerman purchased the land on the southwest side of the hill where the Midway currently sits, all the way back to where the Skylon Tower is located now. On it he built his home Clifton Place, with a large mansion, a guest house, stables, and a garden. There were also 4 gatehouses constructed, one to face each side of the property. The estate changed hands in 1863 to Buffalo Senator John T. Bush. From there it was sold to Harry Oakes in 1928. Oakes was a medical school runaway who joined the gold rush. He had struck it rich when, after 20 years of mining failure bouncing throughout Canada and the United States, his work finally paid off, and his small Northern Ontario mining plot became the most profitable in North America. In 1935, just 7 years after buying the estate, Oakes would move to the Bahamas but retain the land in Niagara Falls. By this time, the first seedlings of Clifton Hill's eventual tourist hotspot had begun to take shape. Several cabin courts and early hotels had popped up in the area, usually providing simple accommodations for tourists on a budget. A man by the name of Earl McIntosh opened the Clifton touring camp in the late 30s, leasing the land from Oakes as well as the gatehouse facing Clifton Hill, which would become the offices and snack bar. In 1943, Oakes was found dead in his home in Nassau, a murder which to this day remains a mystery. Despite having enemies and an insane amount of money, he was generally well-liked and did a lot of charity work. Following his death, his family carried on his holdings company, Welland Securities. McIntosh would seemingly end his lease of the land occupied by the Clifton touring camp, and Welland Securities took control of all the assets left behind on it. The company would continue to run the camp themselves until 1955. By that point, it had become clear that the cabin courts that lined Clifton Hill were only the tip of the possible financial iceberg, and a film starring an up-and-coming blonde actress had blown open the floodgates of honeymooners flocking to the falls. Marilyn Monroe's 1953 film Niagara cemented the region as the honeymoon capital of the world, and by the end of the decade, all the cabin courts had been demolished and replaced with modern, low-rise motels. Welland Securities tore down the Clifton touring camp in 1955, replacing it with the Fallsway Motor Lodge, the franchised location of the then up-and-coming Quality Courts brand, which would eventually evolve into Quality Inn. They would follow it up by building the Park Motor Hotel on the rest of the cleared land the following year. Clifton Hill would gain its first amusement attraction, Louis Tussaud's Wax Museum, in 1959, blowing open the floodgates. Over the next decade, the hill would totally transform, as the 1960s brought several attractions, restaurants, gift shops, and most of all, traffic to the region. This created a high demand for more lodging in the Clifton Hill area, and a man by the name of Peter Stranges knew just that. Peter constructed the Cliffside Motel right next to the Fallsway in 1971, overlooking the hill down to Queen Victoria Park below. He leased the land to build the motel from Welland Securities, something several other attraction operators were doing by this point. One of the attractions that had sprung up nearby in the 60s was the Antique Auto Museum attached to the Sheraton Foxhead Hotel, a hybrid of a wax museum and antique car museum which featured historical cars in various decorated scenes. It would close in 1971, with Peter Strange's buying certain elements of the collection and using them to create the Cars of the Greats Museum in front of his motel, directly along Clifton Hill. The building also featured a miniature golf course on the roof and 2 snack bars flanking the car museum on either side. The driveway into the cliffside was located between this building and the Space Spiral Tower ride. The area continued to evolve and change, and by the 1980s, Clifton Hill once again looked totally different. Haunted attractions, brand restaurants, and most importantly, arcades began to dot the hill. Video game fever had gripped the world hard in the early 80s, breathing new life into arcades that were becoming seen as relics of the penny arcade and electromechanical pinball era. Despite a brief hiccup during the video game crash of 1983, the arcade industry remained a powerhouse, as the market collapse had more affected the then-new home console market, whose oversaturation of rushed and low-quality games had led to the crash in the first place. A fine example of this is the notoriously awful E.T. and Pac-Man Atari cartridges that were rushed out unfinished for the 1982 holiday season, and ended up being buried in the desert by Atari due to being dead stock which they couldn't sell. And yes, you will hear me bring this up again on this channel in the future, because this fact is absolutely insane. When the dust settled, it ended up resetting the industry in favor of the technologically superior arcade, and consumer home consoles wouldn't end up being capable of matching whatever the current arcade quality was at the time until the 2010s. Niagara Falls was no exception to this revolution. In fact, the huge volumes of tourists the area receives and already established amusement districts there made it perfect for arcades. They would spring up everywhere in the falls in the 80s, ranging from small game rooms in most hotels and gift shops to full-blown dedicated arcades. One such arcade was Circus World, an arcade, gift shop, and circus museum that replaced the Cars of the Greats Museum in 1979. But the arcade industry began to head in a different direction at the end of the 80s, as they grew larger and began to offer a wider variety of experiences. This ushered in the era of the Family Entertainment Center. In 1992, the final piece of the puzzle for Clifton Hill's present-day atmosphere would click into place. Welland Securities changed their name to the Harry Oakes Company, or HOCO, and beginning in the late 80s, took ownership of attractions that were formerly just tenants of theirs, including Movieland, the Niagara Marketplace, the Space Spiral Tower, Golfarama atop Circus World, and the Cliffside Motel, which was then integrated into a wing of the adjacent Quality Inn and had its separate pool removed. The only attractions that would continue being leased were the Ripley's Believe It or Not Museum and Circus World, meaning HOCO not only owned all the land on the southwest side of the hill, they now ran everything between Circus World and Ripley's, as well as the Harry's Burgers restaurant and the ice cream stand immediately down the hill from Circus World. With the driveway into the former cliffside wing of the motel no longer needed, as it could now be accessed by the Quality Inn parking lot, it would become the last section of land to be developed along Clifton Hill. And the driveway's place was now a large empty space between Circus World and Movieland, with the Space Spiral Tower stuck in the middle. HOCO called upon attraction design and layout firm White Hutchinson Leisure Learning Group, or WHLLG, to design an attraction around the Space Spiral that would use the final undeveloped land on Clifton Hill. And so WHLLG designed Dazzleland Family Fun Center, a courtyard of buildings arranged in roughly the same layout as the Great Canadian Midway that sits on the land today, for reasons we'll get to later. The buildings around the outside of the courtyard were long and narrow. Picture a courtyard of carnival game trailers, but permanent, appealing buildings vaguely in the architecture style of a European village. Carnival lights adorned much of the signage, and the complex featured an abundance of glorious neon on the attraction's large sign, many of the building's exteriors, and signs featuring the word Dazzleland on the wall in many of the buildings. At the front of the attraction facing the street, on either side of the large open entrance to the courtyard, were 2 fast food restaurants. On the downhillmost side, a Wendy's was built on top of Circus World, replacing the Golf-O-Rama mini-golf that had formerly been on the attraction's roof. It originally featured an outdoor patio in the back corner of the dining area overlooking Clifton Hill, but this would be enclosed in later years. At the back of the dining area next to the washrooms was also a hallway that led into Dazzleland, as the washrooms also served as the washrooms for the attraction itself. Across the entrance to the courtyard from Wendy's was a Domino's Pizza franchise, roughly where the stairwell just to your right is when entering the Great Canadian Midway now. Unlike Wendy's, however, who had the option to dine in, the Domino's was only a takeaway counter. Clockwise, when entering the actual courtyard of Dazzleland, the first building, built into the side of Wendy's, was the Whack-A-Mole building. This section housed several late 80s version B Whack-A-Mole machines from a company named Bob Space Racers, the original manufacturers of Whack-A-Mole. In the same building, further along the same wall, was a handful of various redemption games. The next building, running alongside the forested hill down to Queen Victoria Park, was a larger walk-in building that served as the main redemption arcade area, housing all the miscellaneous ticket redemption games. This area was also home to one of the strangest arcade games in the Falls, a shooting gallery utilizing water guns instead of infrared light guns. It was called Fire Department 911 and appeared to be a custom build from an unknown manufacturer, with the targets consisting of cutout flames. If you have any idea who produced this game, or remember playing it yourself, please leave a comment down below. In the back corner, roughly where the XD Theater now sits in the Midway, was the largest building in Dazzleland, the main arcade. This is where the large collection of video games and pinball machines were located, as well as the Cyclone redemption game. This section could also be accessed via a doorway located in the corner of the redemption game building. The building next to the arcade was connected via a doorway on the other side as well, and ran along the back of Dazzleland. This building housed various carnival-style, coin-operated games such as skee-ball, boom-ball, and rollerball style games, with a couple smaller redemption games also located against the pillars along the front of the building. The final building along the outside, between the skee-ball and dominoes, was the sports games building, which included racing, basketball toss, football toss, and pitching games. A section of this building with a checkered floor contained the racing-themed games, like the 4-player Sega Super GT racing game with a giant marquee header. In the middle of the courtyard was a small carousel, a pond containing a remote-controlled boat game, and a building housing the carousel's control booth, which had miscellaneous games wrapping around it on the other 3 sides. A smaller building in the back half of the courtyard out front the arcade building was the Ticket Redemption Center and prize counter. The courtyard was also full of claw machines and coin-operated rides. The Space Spiral Tower, along with its camera store and Over the Falls in a Barrel Daredevil photo op, were incorporated into Dazzleland, still being accessible directly off the hill. Fun little side note, the tower was located exactly where the Fudge Factory now resides, as the circular store was once the loading area for the tower. Along Clifton Hill, between the camera store and the Domino's, was a fortune teller machine built right into the wall. Ask the Brain. The Brain still lives on inside Movieland, except now he wants a loonie instead of a quarter.
Come on, splurge, Moneybag. I have to pay rent, you know.
To fill the consumer need after the mini-golf atop Circus World was replaced with the Wendy's, a new, much more challenging course would be constructed just up the hill from the Spiral Tower. Its entrance was right on the hill, but the course wrapped around the tower and ran back behind Dazzleland, between the back of Dazzleland and the parking lot of the Quality Inn. It would have no real theme for its first 2 years of operation, and feature generic statues like a comical man teeing off from the course's main waterfall, dolphins jumping out of the fountains, the replica of the Skylon Tower at the back. It's debatable if this attraction could technically be considered part of Dazzleland. While built at the same time and wrapping around Dazzleland proper, it wasn't technically inside it. It's unknown if this course had its own name or was originally considered part of the complex. It would also outlive Dazzleland in its later form as Dinosaur Park Miniature Golf, moving around the area and eventually evolving into the present-day Dinosaur Adventure Golf.
Now eventually you do plan to have dinosaurs on your dinosaur tour, right? Hello?
This early version of the Dazzleland complex would be pretty short-lived, with changes coming just 2 years later in 1994. The whack-a-mole and prize buildings would be switched around, and the water gun shooting gallery would also switch places with the miscellaneous games next to the whack-a-mole machines. The biggest change, however, would come in the form of a re-theme of the mini-golf. Riding off the success of the film Jurassic Park, the course would now become Dinosaur Park Miniature Golf. Unique fiberglass dinosaurs now populated the course, and a dragon-like sea serpent was added to the remote-controlled boat pond. It's unknown who sculpted these figures, but it's possible they're the work of someone from within WHLLG. Allegedly, the firm only did planning for the project, however, so for now, the artist behind these figures will remain a mystery. Dazzleland was an instant success, being one of the crucial moments in the development of the Niagara Falls tourism industry that forever changed the area. It was the first family entertainment center, or FEC, in the Falls, combining arcade machines with other rides and attractions all in one arcade-like complex, more accessible than an amusement park, yet more captivating than a regular arcade. Almost every arcade to open in the Falls since Dazzleland has also been an FEC, a clear indication of its influence. The complex had a unique but distinct atmosphere, having no exact theme other than a whimsical, fantasy-like environment as represented by the stars and moons on the attraction's signage. The carnival-like atmosphere and variety in the attraction made it stand out from the other arcades in the area at the time, and it became a go-to hangout for both tourists and locals alike. Its variety also made it popular with all demographics, featuring pinball and video games popular with teenagers and adults, redemption games and rides largely popular with children and families, and an open, appealing atmosphere even drawing in those who usually wouldn't be arcade goers. Its popularity, however, would also be its demise, and it would be relatively short-lived, only lasting a decade. When the government of Ontario was selecting the location for the government-run Casino Niagara in the mid-90s, Hoco apparently put in a bid to get the casino on their land. Eventually, the casino went to the Falls Avenue Company, replacing the Maple Leaf Village Mall between the Sheraton Foxhead and the Sheraton Brock hotels. This ended up being a financial injection large enough to start a bit of an attractions arms race against Hoco. After the rebranding of all the hotels in the Falls Avenue complex, the opening of the Hard Rock Cafe and Planet Hollywood, and a massive 2002 expansion to the complex consisting of Rainforest Cafe, WWE Niagara Falls, and the 4D Motion Theater, the Falls Avenue Company was well into a several-stage redevelopment plan. The plan also featured upcoming additions of more attractions to fill out the already built and soon-to-be-named MGM Studios Plaza that the 4D Motion Theater sat in the basement of, as well as an indoor FEC to replace the mall on the second floor of the now renamed Sheraton Fallsview. With Dazzleland already being a massive success, and wanting to stay ahead of the curve, Hoco didn't just expand, but also refine it into an entirely new attraction. More games reasonably equals higher guest enjoyment, and therefore more profit. With this taken into account, the outdoor courtyard style with its room for walkways between the buildings was redesigned, and Hoco again called upon WHLLG. They designed not only a remodel of Dazzleland, but an incredible 5-stage plan that, if seen through to completion, would have changed Clifton Hill even more than it ended up doing, leading up to an outdoor amusement park and a water park hotel in the field between Clifton Hill and the Skylon Tower. However, only steps 1 to 3 would ever come to fruition. Step 1 was remodeling Dazzleland into the Great Canadian Midway, which opened in spring 2002 at a cost of around $10 million, creating 200 full-time jobs, as well as an additional 100 seasonal positions.
Are you ready to play? Step right up to the spectacular Great Canadian Midway and enjoy hours of entertainment. Guests of all ages can test their skills with over 300 games and win tickets for fabulous prizes. Everyone is a winner at the Great Canadian Midway.
The level, concrete foundation Dazzleland was built on was kept as the foundation of the Midway, hence why it has a similar footprint. Dinosaur Park Miniature Golf was moved to a former parking lot in front of Comfort Inn, and Wendy's would remain above Circus World with the Midway built around it. Rather than have several different buildings, the Midway would all be one indoor space, allowing for more games and year-round operation, a genius business move. The Midway, like Dazzleland before it however, was divided into different themed areas and attractions, with the interior themed to an old-school amusement park at nighttime to make it feel outdoors. This makes the Midway somewhat of a spiritual successor to Dazzleland, building on the theme and retaining the same atmosphere. The central area of the new Midway housed the Game Zone, with miscellaneous redemption games, arcade games, and strings of carnival-style lights between poles above the arcade. Surrounding this area was originally a variety of fake facades utilizing forced perspectives to resemble the buildings and stalls of a carnival Midway. As stated earlier, Wendy's would remain, complete with the former entrance on the Dazzleland side that now exited into the Midway. The only change would be the removal of the hallway near the washrooms at the back of the restaurant, which formerly led to Dazzleland. The Midway would have its own, much larger washrooms, rendering the connecting hallway redundant. Next to Wendy's, roughly in the place of the former video game and pinball building in the back corner of Dazzleland, was the Ride Theater. It was a small moving theater on a tilting platform which guests would board to watch a 3D ride film. It was originally themed to a funhouse, as it showed the Cymex ride film Funhouse Express, also sometimes referred to as simply Fun Express. The facade was made to resemble red and white carnival banners flanking the theater's main sign above the ticket and control booth, which read Ride Theater in a vintage carnival-style font. Clockwise to the Ride Theater was the funnel cake stand, and next to that the prize counter. Along the wall adjacent to that one was a large light-up design resembling the marquee of a carnival game stand. Underneath it was all the carnival-esque redemption games, including skee-ball, boom-ball, roll-a-ball, and an American high striker hammer game in the center. Continuing clockwise around the Midway's walls would bring you to the Game Factory, with a crooked, askew factory building acting as its facade, provided by an Edmonton company named Art Attack FX. To understand the Game Factory, you first have to take a look at what existed upstairs above it. When Dinosaur Park was moved, Boston Pizza and Sports Zone was built roughly in its place. These were also accessible from the Midway via a staircase up immediately to the right when you walked in the doors. The Sports Zone used the same tokens as the Midway, housing most of the sports games for the arcade, including pool tables and a bowling alley, and you could walk through the restaurant to get to the area from the Midway. It was under this area that the Game Factory existed in the Midway below, with all the water, utility, and power hookups necessary for the restaurant and arcade above being cleverly incorporated into the factory theme of the lower ceilinged area. This is where several pinball machines and other miscellaneous games originally resided, and a few originals still reside to this day. One of these includes an old Western-themed shooting gallery that may have come out of Circus World, or a variety of other locations. The Falls have seen a variety of Western-themed shooting galleries over the years, mostly Bonanza shooting galleries dating to the 1970s. If the Midways is in fact recycled from another attraction, it stands to reason it's most likely that it came out of Circus World, who rented their space from Hoco and formerly operated a similar-sized shooting gallery that was removed around this time. The gallery is themed to a shooting game hosted by proprietor Jackalope Bob. Its contents have mostly been updated over the years, but some of the animatronics and props it originally contained included a bear, a drunk bandit, a raccoon, a snake, a skunk, a coyote, and Jackalope Bob himself in a covered wagon with a rifle. And for those of you who aren't aware, this is a jackalope, and no, it does not exist. The Game Factory formerly housed another shooting gallery, named Blasteroid, which was a one-of-a-kind custom shooting gallery game by arcade game company Lasertron. The game was themed to a laser tag-esque practice range bunker, featuring blacklight targets with bright, flashing sensors that moved around on arms.
Killer! Your objective is to blast out the lighted targets as fast as you can. Are you ready? Begin blasting now!
The back corner of the Game Factory is also where you can find the washrooms. Located next to the Game Factory, underneath the rest of Boston Pizza and the Sports Zone, is Ghost Blasters, a blacklight, interactive laser shooting dark ride by the Sally Corporation of Florida. The ride was a package offered by Sally Corp and was already installed in 4 other locations. The Midways, however, would be the grandest. Rather than being themed to a regular haunted mansion, as was the pre-packaged story of the ride, the Midway's version was themed to a haunted hotel to match local history of the area. In addition to all the props that came with the ride, several custom ones were made by Sally Corp for Hoko to match the custom theme. Special audio cues were also recorded to include nods to the setting being a haunted hotel.
Practice is over. Now go.
Despite being one story underneath Boston Pizza, it originally had an impressive 2-story facade with crooked roof peaks also provided by Art Attack Effects. The ride is a journey through the Bleakstone Manor Hotel, formerly owned by the late Count Lucifer, who was obsessed with the paranormal during his life. Following his death, his powerful ghost has since turned the abandoned hotel into a place for the army of the dead to check in to the world of the living. The decrepit hotel and its unseen levels of paranormal activity have spread outside its walls and are terrorizing the local neighborhood, leaving it decrepit and abandoned as well. Your job is to enter the hotel armed with Professor Fearstruck's Ghost Blasters, which hold the power to banish the dead back to their realm and rid it of Lucifer and his army. The ride has since changed over the years, with many of its story elements taking a back seat and losing their clarity since the ride opened. However, it remains perhaps the most iconic feature of the Midway to this day. Even the Midway's logo has a genius design. The individual letter fonts making up the word Midway, referencing all the areas and attractions originally found in the complex. Something which flies right over most people's heads now that many of said elements have been changed or removed. The M is patterned with a design similar to that of the Game Zone's original carpet. The bowling pin I is a reference to the Sports Zone. Old school light bulbs on the D reference the lights that made up the word snacks above the funnel cake stand. The Art Deco font of the W is similar to the font of the original Ride Theater's logo. The spooky and slime-covered A is a reference to Ghost Blasters, and the industrial typeface of the Y is a reference to the Game Factory area. The exterior of the attraction features this logo proudly on a double-sided sign which can be seen from either up or down the hill. The sign is perched on an overhang offering a large covered area to the sidewalk below, hauling tourists in through the attraction's massive slide-up bay doors. On the front wall of the building, flanking the overhang, was originally a sign on each side, promoting a different ride within. Signs remain in these spots today, however the originals were very different. The one on the downhill side of the main sign was a poster for the Ride Theater, and on the uphill side of the main sign was the exterior signage for Ghost Blasters, which included gargoyles, lanterns, and a tall sign showing a photo of the ride and its logo. This sign was right above the set of double doors, and on either side of them the thematic signage continued. On each side was a lenticular poster in a Gothic stone box showing images of the attraction that changed as you walked past. These double doors are always unlocked while the Midway is open, but are mainly used when the large bay doors must remain shut in the winter. To say the Midway did well and continues to do well is an understatement. It became an instant icon of Clifton Hill, its giant sign becoming synonymous with the street itself. In total, it originally provided 64,000 square feet of games, rides, entertainment, and dining across 2 floors, and was originally home to over 250 games in total, many of which were kept from the Dazzleland days. These included the ever-popular Wheel 'em In, which had been Dazzleland's most profitable game, the aforementioned skee-ball machines, rollerball and boomball machines, several video games and pinball machines, and the giant Sega Super GT racing game that was now placed in front of the ride theater. There would also be several then new games, however, including large-screen Sega simulator titles like Top Skater, Water Ski, and Prop Cycle, several new coin pushers joining those held over from Dazzleland, Konami's mocap boxing, a sumo multi-game motion system machine, the Maze of Kings Egyptian-themed light gun video game, dancing games, and much more. The sports zone upstairs even featured 3 linked, large-screen Harley-Davidson motorcycle simulator machines, a 4-player Daytona USA with TV monitors atop it so gameplay could be watched by Boston Pizza bar patrons, a Real Sports virtual sports simulator cage, and several more redemption, video, and pinball games. There was also a second, smaller redemption counter upstairs in the sports zone, as well as the aforementioned Cosmic Bowling glow-in-the-dark bowling alley, featuring 6 Brunswick Bowlingo lanes. The alley featured a large, 3-dimensional blacklight mural beside it matching the Cosmic Bowling theme. All this safely squashed any chance of the Falls Avenue complex overshadowing the attractions further up the hill, but it wasn't for lack of trying. Marvel Superheroes Adventure City would end up being the FEC that replaced the Sheridan's second-floor mall in 2004. It's unclear exactly when certain elements were planned for the Falls Avenue complex, and if the attraction's details were planned before or after the Midway opened, but the Midway's influence on Adventure City in at least some form is clear. Shortly after this, the Midway itself would see its first wave of updates. The ride theater would be renamed the FX Thrill Ride Theater and receive new exterior signage. The new signage featured a fiberglass ride vehicle protruding from the wall as if it had crashed through it. The ride vehicle resembled the one you're supposedly sitting in during the events of the ride film, and featured a clown sitting in the car. The theater itself would see a massive overhaul in 2005. It would now show Robots of Mars, a film that itself is now shrouded in a bit of mystery. It was a privately created film licensed to Cymex Ride Systems, available in both a standard 21-minute version and a cut-down ride theater version. It's possible a portion of the film which took place before the events of the ride version, and were therefore cut from it, were used as the pre-show on the screen in the attraction's waiting room. This is of significance as both the ride version and the full unedited version of the film with the 21-minute runtime are currently considered lost media. It's estimated the film was only shown at an extremely small handful of ride theaters the world over, leading to its obscurity. The Lost Media Wiki, who archives and searches for media inaccessible to the general public, doesn't even have it listed on the website, despite a limited search effort existing in some YouTube comment sections of uploads of trailers of both versions of the film, as well as limited clips uploaded in Spanish by a bilingual voice actor who worked on a dub of the film for its distributor, N-Wave Animation.
¡Sparky! ¡Sparky! ¡Adelante! ¿Me escucha, Sparky? ¡Sparky! ¡Llega el pozo de perdición! ¡Afirmativo, doctor! ¿Oíste, Plasto?
The exterior of the theater would now be themed to the film, complete with the ride's sign atop a massive flying saucer protruding out of the wall, adorned with flashing lights. The wall itself would now feature a massive mural themed to the film that stretched from the wall Wendy's is along, over the ride's entrance, over the Sega Super GT game, and all the way to the funnel cake stand. The mural made several references to the film, the most prominent being the giant painting of one of the sand creatures you escape from in the film over the Sega Super GT game. Under the flying saucer sat the ticket and control desk, flanked by the attraction's entrance and exit. Fiberglass statues portraying characters from the film, namely Marty the Martian and Doc the Robot, stood next to the entrance and exit, which were located under giant, glowing tower structures. Bird Attack FX was once again called upon to provide the theming for the updated theater. Ghostbusters would receive updates as well, with the ending of the ride being changed just a few years after it opened, the final battle against Lucifer, and the scene after the Boo Bomb is detonated. Being removed in favor of a much more elaborate graveyard scene. All the props from the original ending were relocated elsewhere in the ride. The new figures for the scene, as well as several additions to the lobby, produced by an Ohio company called Scare Factory, and the lobby was given new, more theme-fitting hotel wallpaper, featuring a ghost pattern instead of the gothic brick design it opened with. Robots of Mars would be replaced by the Cosmic Coaster film in 2007, but the thematic elements would remain as they matched the space theme of the new film, save for Marty the Martian, who was moved to the lobby of Galaxy Golf up the hill. The Cosmic Coaster film would later outlive the thematic elements outside the theater, but more on that later. The film would begin a hiatus in 2008 with the theater showing the Time Riders film, hosted by John Cleese. It too would be short-lived. It would be the last film shown fitting the theater's sci-fi theme, being replaced sometime around 2010 by an edited version of Funhouse Express with additional shots and footage, now dubbed Coaster Chaos, which has actually become another piece of lost media tied to the theater. This would be the last film shown using the original ride system and theater layout, somewhat poetically, as the original Fun Express had been the first. The original theater's name would drop the word thrill and simply be named the FX Ride Theater in its final days, its carnival-themed movie somewhat juxtaposed to the heavy space theming out front. However, the exterior signage outside the Midway would once again be relevant to the film being shown, although I suppose it always kind of was, due to being an amusement park ride vehicle, matching the theme of the Greater Midway. By this point, the final stages of Hoko's aforementioned 5-stage plan that began with the Midway had been scrapped in favor of a new redevelopment plan in wake of massive changes to the entertainment industry. Fallout from the recession was in full swing, and tourism had continued to decline since 9/11. Changing technology and interests, but no real nostalgia trend yet, created a perfect storm, and the amusement park idea was scrapped. However, the exact reasons remain a mystery to this day. With a different design company doing the groundwork and no amusement park to lead up to anymore, any of the thematic elements the Midway opened with would unfortunately be removed and replaced in the next decade. The first of many changes in this less structured era of direction for the Midway would be the funnel cake stand beside the FX Theater being replaced with an expanded area of ticket counting machines in the very early 2010s. Strike Rock and Bowl opened in 2011 as an expansion and rebranding of the sports zone connected to Boston Pizza upstairs. The new 14-lane bowling alley replaced the Bowlingo alley that had previously been upstairs, and the Real Sports Simulator was removed, along with the Cosmic Bowling mural, due to the wall they were along being the one knocked out for the expansion. The large-screen racing games that patrons could view from Boston Pizza's dining area were moved to the Game Factory around this time, and the space along the wall filled in with various other games. The FX Thrill Ride Theater was gutted, its theming removed, and reopened as the XV Theater. The new ride was built by motion ride system company Triotech, with the new ride system utilizing individually moving seats rather than the entire seating section being on one moving platform. This allows for a higher rider capacity, more comfortable seating, and guests being able to switch the motion on or off individually to prevent motion sickness. The ride reopened with the new moniker in 2012, the first film it showed being none other than the Cosmic Coaster. A new, flat, printed sign for the theater replaced the themed signage outside the Midway, and the giant 4-player Sega GT game previously along the wall outside the theater was moved to the Game Factory. The gradual phasing out of many of the games the Midway opened with ramped up around 2014, with the older pinball and video games being the first to go. Other updates came in 2016, when the Blastroid shooting gallery was removed from the game factory, the carpeting for the entire arcade was replaced, and the Safari Adventure film, which had briefly replaced the Cosmic Coaster, was replaced by the Wild West Coaster film in the XD Theater, the entire theater now taking the name of the latter. 2 of the Daytona USA machines and 2 of the Sega Super GT machines were also removed, and the giant Sega Super GT header would follow suit shortly after. By this point, the integration of the Sports Zone, now known as Strike Rock and Bowl, as part of the actual Midway had begun to fall away, and the area became steadily less sports-themed and more akin to a second, separate arcade. This was furthered even more by a sign which appeared, reading Sports Zone in the main Midway below. It was added to the wall next to the XD Theater after the old theater's theming was removed. However, this area always seemed to have a revolving door of randomly themed games. In 2018, Boston Pizza was heavily remodeled, and much of its custom, location-oriented theming was removed as part of an initiative to match Hoko's franchised restaurants with the standard styles of them found elsewhere in the country. Gone was the neon, custom signage, and integration of the restaurant into the themes of the Midway. This included the removal of the games against the wall along the walkway through Boston Pizza from Strike Rock and Bowl, leading to the staircase to the Midway. The staircase itself would finally be sealed off entirely when the pandemic hit in 2020. This was likely because you had to walk through the restaurant to get to the bowling alley, and during the pandemic, an employee likely would have had to man the stairwell at all times, carding people for proof of vaccine. Chances are it wasn't the only contributing factor to the decision, however, as long before the pandemic, carding people for ID when the upstairs area became 19 plus after a certain time had required someone staffing the stairwell during the evening hours anyway since the attraction opened, and was likely a costly endeavor. It was while the attraction was closed during the pandemic that the final remaining billiard tables of the Midway would be removed from the sports zone, which had been dwindling in numbers in the recent years. The large light-up billiard triangle remains on the attraction's ceiling, however, one of the last surviving elements of the original sports zone. The same year, Ghost Blasters had the large haunted house facade removed, along with the gothic signage for it outside the Midway. Both the exterior sign and the facade would be replaced with flat, cut-out signage. The Game Factory's facade would follow suit the following year. I realize I'm an old man whose golden age is the atmosphere of the early 2000s amusement industry, but I understand that in order to stay relevant and appeal to the masses in a faster-paced world, a company needs to move forward, for better or for worse. That being said, this is one change that I simply cannot wrap my head around from a business standpoint. These pieces of theming were massive, and I imagine it would have cost much more to remove and replace them than the added profit the company could possibly gain from an aesthetic change such as this one. Especially since I think many of you would agree this is hardly an improvement. The only possible conclusion I can come to is that the old facades were difficult to dust and maintain due to their height and intricacies, but I doubt that would have been a large enough financial motivation for a change this large. The Wild West Coaster was updated as well, now reverting to the name XD Theater and welcoming back a revolving turnstile of films, starting with the Cosmic Coaster's second return to the Midway in 2022. Meanwhile, several older games from the Dazzleland era continued to be phased out, including the original skee-ball machines, Roll-A-Ball, the water gun game, Boomball, Knockdown, Bromley's Rockin' Bowl, Namco's incredibly rare and now highly valuable Godzilla Wars Jr., Treasure Falls, Hungry Dragon, Wacky Gator, the last remnants of Sega Super GT and Daytona USA, as well as several more. The biggest change in the Midway's history, however, came in February of 2024, when the entire arcade switched from a traditional token and tickets operation to running on a play card system. This had various impacts on the Midway, the most obvious being the removal of all of the token action games, many of which were the last remnants of Dazzleland by this point. This included classics like Wheel 'Em In, Smokin' Token, Go 'n' Rollin', Wonder Wheel, Deep Freeze, and all the coin pushers, save for the more modern, rapid-fire ones that use recycling tokens which never leave the machine. Various new games filled in the space created, including a large number of e-claw electronically fixed claw machines. If you don't already know why the arcade community usually takes issue with these, I suggest you look it up. It also led to the removal of the ticket counter machines next to the prize counter. One positive to seemingly come out of it, however, was the reopening of the staircase from the Midway up to Boston Pizza and Strike Rock and Bowl, which is now named the Strike Games Zone, perhaps due to the cross-compatible play cards proudly displaying the logos of both the Midway and the bowling alley. When the Midway debuted the play card system, Bone Blaster's Shooting Gallery, which had briefly occupied the front half of the former Fun Factory store space next to Movieland, was moved into the arcade along the Wendy's wall. The gallery was built by Daniels Woodland, the benchmark name in shooting galleries, and for good reason. It's incredibly well designed, witty, and worth the money, despite taking up a huge amount of former arcade floor space. Which brings us to present day as of the creation of this video. The Midway has now been entertaining guests for over 2 decades, 3 if you include its past incarnation as Dazzleland. It may be very different than it was when it opened, both in contents and concept, but the Midway still offers a wide variety of games for various styles of arcade goers. The future for the attraction remains unclear, as it has always seemed to, and always will be, a reflection of larger industry trends. That being said, while the glory days of its thematic elements and storytelling are gone, several elements such as Ghost Blasters, the Wild West Shooting Gallery, the string carnival lights and marquee in the main game zone, and an increasingly smaller handful of older games still remain. Between Adventure City's even more lackluster attempts at removing its theming, some of the totally themeless FECs that have recently opened up in the area, and the lack of maintenance at the Skylon Tower's SkyQuest, despite its impressive collection of rare and vintage games, the Midway continues to be a standout location that still rises above the rest. Both Dazzleland and the Midway are incredibly important attractions to me, and this channel likely wouldn't exist without them. Hazy memories of Dazzleland are actually my earliest memories of existence on this earth, which I've narrowed down through various dates to occurring less than a year after I was born. Once it was closed and was replaced with the Midway became my favorite attraction from my childhood into my teenage years, and was where I spent the majority of my time on trips to Niagara Falls. The ease of stepping right out of your hotel room at the Quality or Comfort Inn, walking right into the sports zone, and being able to go straight downstairs to the Midway was seamless integration on Hoko's part, and somehow made this massive entertainment complex feel like a cozy part of your hotel. Even with the hotels and much of the theming long gone along with the games I grew up with, I can't describe the feeling of excitement and nostalgia I get walking into this building. Do you have memories of visiting Dazzleland or the Midway? If so, please leave a comment down below. Also, if you enjoyed this video and want to see more, please like and subscribe, as it greatly helps against YouTube's algorithms and allows important historical information such as this to reach a wider audience. If you enjoyed this mini documentary, check out my website, Canadian Amusement History. It's a digital museum archiving the history of past and present attractions across Canada, with a focus on the Niagara region. There you can find written history articles on attractions, historical images and footage, lists of attractions in different areas, and more. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next episode of Canadian Amusement History.